Years ago, I worked as a exploration geologist and actually worked as a hydrologist for some time for Phillips Petroleum. And when I heard that Bobby was doing a water presentation, I offered to help her. It's just a passion of mine to watch water. And water is so important for all of Arizona and especially for the West Valley. And in the last couple months of my getting ready for this presentation, I've had some significant help from 3 different individuals. Mark Lewis, the Central Arizona Water Conservation District board member, gave me a plethora of information and good dialogue back and forth, pros and cons of what's going on. Leslie Williams, a great friend of mine for the last bunch of years, with SRP, director of SRP, and owner, Brian, could you tell me how to pronounce your company name?
Brian Hagman with Deluge Technologies.
All right. So Brian has, an interesting thing, Brian has, I don't know if it's great or not, but he sounds like a great guy. He's made a presentation to Doug Ducey. He's got a desalination process that reduces some of the cost by using solar. And if you know anything about the West Valley, under Luke Air Force Base, there's a massive, huge salt dome that tends to make the water in this area fairly brackish. And that's one of the concerns for the West Valley. You guys wouldn't be here if you didn't know that this area of the country, of the state of Phoenix, is going to be one of the fastest growing areas in the country, population-wise. Goodyear, Buckeye, on fire. There's a lot of negative press, however, and you see the bathtub rings in Lake Powell, Lake Mead. There's a lot of press out there right now about does Arizona or Phoenix or the West Valley have enough water to sustain a 100-year growth or a 100-year supply of water. One of the goals of this meeting is to diffuse that negative press. In the second page of the handout that's in front of you with the sponsors on the second page, there are some bullet points about all of Arizona. Another goal of this meeting will be to talk about Metro Phoenix specifically and the West Valley, and again, diffuse any negative issues, but also our presenter will talk about not only the CAP water, which has got an almost 600,000 acre-feet reduction coming up starting the end of this year, but also talk to groundwater, and most of Buckeye uses groundwater for the domestic use. The third goal for this meeting, it's a passion of mine to probably help and give something back to the community that I've worked in for the last 25 years with commercial brokerage, is to maybe spearhead or maybe get together a group of people that can identify with Sarah's help some of the issues that we should address now so that 10 years from now we are more guaranteed to have a good water supply for domestic growth, both residential and commercial. So one thing, just to move this along quickly, please don't ask speaker questions during the presentation. Let her go through this quickly. I'll get out of your way in a second. And maybe queue up if you got questions coming up towards the end of the presentation. Queue up to me. I'll be right here. I'll give you the mic, ask you to give your name, affiliation, and make a comment or a question, and that'll be then recorded on the video that Brian is doing right now. And that video will be available to anybody that attended here today or anybody that would like to ask for that in the future. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sarah Porter. Sarah is a graduate of, what's that small college you went to? Oh yeah, Harvard, yeah. Also, director of ASU's Kyle Institute for Water Policy, graduated with a bachelor's degree from Harvard and got her Juris Doctor from Arizona State University, ranking 3rd in her class. We're talking smart here. Left her career in 2006 to address Arizona's natural resource challenges. Water is available, but it's partially mired in legal issues. Sarah is the perfect speaker, being an attorney with a non-biased research institute, and is also often quoted and interviewed by the media. Sarah Porter.
Okay, I'm good. Well, good morning. It's such a pleasure to be with you all. And I want to start out by asking, and let's be honest here, show of hands, who here works in water? Show of hands. Yeah, I've flushed you out. I'll tell you something. You know, in Arizona, we have this term for people who are water managers, water professionals. You may have heard it. What do we call people who work in water? Water people, come on. Water buffalo? Water buffaloes. And the reason is, I've discovered in my 5 years, or whatever it is now, 7 years of being the director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy, it's because water people are herd animals. And they can't, it's very uncomfortable to have a water talk happen within about a 10-mile radius and not be there. You have to be there. So anyway, I am very happy to be with you all. And Jim said diffuse, and I want to say diffuse is broadly defined. So diffusing is what I'm going to do today, but we're going to get into some nitty-gritty issues about water issues in the West Valley. It's really nice to be able to talk about a specific region like the West Valley. So often I'm giving talks about water policy in Arizona, and I'll have like 30 minutes to explain 5 very complex subjects, and it's difficult. Today I have one complex subject that we're going to have to really, I'm going to ask you to stay with me, but I'll give you a warning before we get there. And what I'm going to do is first let you know a little bit about the Kyle Center for Water Policy, and then we're going to do just a quick little bit of Arizona water basics. And then we will move on to the West Valley. What's the situation? What are the water challenges? And what are the solutions to those challenges? So if that's diffusing, I'm here to diffuse. So let's start. I don't think my bio says that I'm a Phoenix native, and so, and I'm pretty old, so I remember when this part of Arizona was a lot of cotton fields, and I feel very, very fond of the West Valley. It was the West Valley when I was born, but I was born close to 15th Avenue and Northern. That was the West Valley, and then my family moved to the far east Arcadia area of Phoenix. But anyway, I am the first director of the first and only ever director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy, which is part of Arizona State University's Morrison Institute for Public Policy. It's a 40-year-old policy center or think tank. It's very important to us that we do our work in a nonpartisan, data-driven manner with respect for the historical context in which policy issues emerge. And when we're talking about water, historical context is really everything. The Kyle Center, we were launched in late 2014. I came on board early 2015. And we've done the stuff that you would expect a water policy center to do. We published all those reports, and they cover the big range of, a huge range of water issues, mostly in Arizona. But the most exciting thing we've done is to launch a hub of water resources and policy information called the Arizona Water Blueprint. It's an evergreen, continuously updated hub of information, azwaterblueprint.asu.edu. I'll be talking about or showing you slides from the blueprint a lot today as we start to familiarize ourselves with the West Valley. And you see here in the lower right-hand corner a screenshot of one of the tools that we have on the Arizona Water Blueprint, which is a groundwater level change tool that you can use to see what's going on with all of the basins in the state of Arizona. And this is just our landing page, just so you know. We have a huge interactive map that has over 60 data-enriched layers related to water and policy and anything relevant. We have that groundwater level change tool. We have the water issues and depth section will take you to a series of explainers on different water topics, including water augmentation. That is how you bring new water into a system. What are the concepts for doing that? And that's one that you might want to check out later. And also some information on the Colorado River shortage, which is so much in the news. On that page, we have 2 resources. One is an explainer, and we're really explaining to the valley what Colorado River shortage means, and we update this all the time. This is really a moving target, and we are constantly updating this shortage explainer. More on the Colorado River later. And then if you want to really geek out, you can go to this other tool we have, which is a tool that shows all of the allocations, or as we say in water parlance, entitlements of Colorado River water that are held by Central Arizona water users. You can see who's using it, who's leasing it, what priority they have, because there are different priorities within the Central Arizona project, contract holders, so that's really fun. All right, now on to some water basics. Let's start with this very, very complex fact. Arizona's a dry state, right? You probably knew that if you've been here for more than 2 months. We get very little of our water from precipitation that falls directly on the ground. This is actually a precipitation map, and anything from that middle blue to the lighter blue is semi-arid or arid, and you know this. Arizona is mostly an arid state. And so from ancient times, from the ancient Hohokam on to modern people living in central Arizona, we've had to use a combination of engineering and storage and importation to make sure that we have enough water for the things we want to do, for our economic activities, for our quality of life. And so that's really what we're talking about. When we're talking about water in Arizona, we're talking about this work of planning ahead, doing the engineering, doing the storage, making sure that we have enough water. A next important, super important fact that is very hard to get members of the news media from the East Coast to understand, and that is the Colorado River is not the only supply of water for the state of Arizona. Our taps are not about to go dry. This is the sort of recent distribution of the Arizona water portfolio based on demand. And so we have, yes, the Colorado River has been historically, and I would say forever, but especially since the mid-1980s when the CAP began making deliveries to central Arizona, it has been an increasingly important supply of water for Arizona, and to a great extent it has been the supply for growth for central Arizona. And by central Arizona I mean Phoenix to Tucson, the 3-county CAP service area. We also have in-state rivers though. I've spent my entire life drinking water from the biggest in-state surface water system. Anyone know what that is? SRP. It's the Salt Verde system, and it's a very significant source supply of water, especially, of course, for the greater Phoenix area. And then we have groundwater, which is water that is in aquifers, and it's pumped up. We pump it up in wells or through pumps. And we have reclaimed water. We used to call this effluent. That's not a politically correct term anymore, right, water people? We don't say effluent anymore, we say reclaimed water. And that is, for cities, and we'll get to this, a really important water supply. And it is going to become more and more important for cities. A note about groundwater. Because we're a dry state, we have a tendency to pump groundwater out of the aquifers much, much faster than nature replenishes it. Much, much faster even than both nature and humans are able to replenish it. And so in water planning talk, we think of groundwater as non-renewable because we use it up. It's a finite supply. On the other hand, surface water, while the amount may vary from year to year, we have an expectation that surface water will continue to flow. And so surface water from our in-state rivers, from the Colorado River, is comparatively renewable. And I would argue that effluent reclaimed water is also a renewable supply, because just as we have a reasonable expectation that the Salt and Verde will continue to flow and continue to fill our reservoirs, we also have a reasonable expectation that people living in cities in central Arizona will continue to dump water down the drain and flush it. So reclaimed water is a renewable supply.
Another important fundamental about water in Arizona is that it's a little bit complicated. Is this a surprise to anyone? I felt really proud of my PowerPoint skills when I made this graphic. I mean, thank you. But this morning when I was looking at this, I thought, you know, this is not even accurate. There are, you know, I thought there are really 6 types of water, and each of these types of water, and this is why it's a little bit complicated, each one of these kinds of water has its own legal regime. And the legal regimes aren't necessarily overlapping. They can be quite distinct. So the rules for Colorado River water are not the same as the rules for in-state surface water. The rules for groundwater within the areas that we'll talk about, including the Phoenix area where groundwater is managed, are not at all the same as the rules for outside of the active management areas, non-AMA groundwater. The rules for, I use the bad word, effluent, are not the same as the rules for these other types of water. So it's a little bit complicated. And then this is a super important point. Water tends to be local. And by that, what I mean is that it is the responsibility of each water provider, whether it's a city or a private water provider, to make sure that it has sufficient water in its portfolio for the long-term needs of its customer base to meet demand over the long term. So often I hear from people, they want to talk about our water and what we do with water as if there's one big bucket of water that somehow on some kind of rolling basis, some people decide on the allocation. Not the case at all. Each municipality, each water provider needs to secure its own portfolio. And in the case of Central Arizona, they have to also satisfy pretty rigorous rules about making sure that they can meet the realistic long-term demands. Now, this particular graphic I think is really beautiful. It comes from a Central Arizona Project study of where the West Valley communities would get water projected as of 2060. And this is just one of several scenarios, so you know, don't freak out about it or anything. But I think why this is visually so helpful is that every color that you see there, every block, is a different type of water. And what I want you to notice is how different from city to city the colors and the sizes of the different blocks are. And that relates to the challenges and opportunities of every single different water provider to meet its needs. So, and then another super important point that just seems counterintuitive, I think, to a lot of people. And that is that population and economic growth have, to a great extent, been decoupled from water demand. That means that we are able, in some communities, to do a significant amount of growth, maybe all of the projected growth, on water supplies that are already in hand. Now, if you were a city, oh, and I want to point out, to bear this out, take a look at the orange line. This graphic is from 2000 to 2018, I think. Now, in around this time, between 2000 and 2020, we had about a 46% increase in population in the Sun Corridor in Central Arizona. Water demand increased 14% in that time. It could have increased 0. It could have gone down. We could have had a net decrease in total water demand had we needed to, had there been policies in place that really pushed people to use less water or pushed businesses to use less water. We didn't need to do that, so it didn't happen. But this is important, and I hope it's kind of encouraging for you all if you're thinking about growth and where's the water going to come from. The challenge is not what it seems at first blush. Now, if you were Phoenix or Glendale and you were around to get the water when it was being allocated, some of it way back in 1908 when the Salt River Valley Water Users Association was formed, and farmers came together to build the very first dam for the valley, Roosevelt Dam. That was when one big allocation was sort of made. And then another time was in the 70s when water from the CAP was being allocated out. And so cities that were around tend to have nice supplies, cities that were around and able to ask for water during those times, they tend to have pretty robust portfolios. That is not the case for communities that didn't exist at that time. And it's not the case for communities that never dreamed of becoming big cities at the time. And that is the situation that many West Valley communities are in. Not all to the same degree, but that's really the challenge. A place like Buckeye did not aspire to be a big city in 1972 when CAP allocations were made. And so Buckeye didn't go out and fight for a giant allocation of CAP water. And it wouldn't have got it anyhow. And I'll get into that. Nothing against Buckeye, it's just that the problem was very great for Phoenix and Tucson. But sticking with this idea of the decoupling of water demand and population and economic growth, this is a graphic that the Arizona Department of Water Resources has developed. That's our water supply agency by the state, by the way, and it's a really good, well-run agency. But essentially this shows the blue drops, the top line is water demand from 1957 until 2019. The line going up with the little human figure is population growth. And then the bars show the economic growth in Arizona. And the bottom of this graphic tells you, everything you need to know. We've had this huge growth in the economy. We've had a very significant growth, 555% in population since that time, and yet our net water demand has gone down. It's gone down for many reasons. Probably the biggest is that lots of farming has gone away. Lots of farming that probably didn't make a huge contribution to the economy has gone away, partly because of growing cities on top of those farms. Cities, urban development tends to use a lot less water than a farm. And just a way of thinking about it is that according to our Department of Water Resources, maybe the Surprise folks have a different number, but 4 efficient, modern, single-family homes use 1 acre-foot of water per year. And an acre-foot of water is about 326,000 gallons. So 4 homes will use 1 acre-foot of water per year. A cotton farm might need to use 4, 5, 6 acre-feet of water per acre. So if you could put 4 homes on an acre, you're conserving maybe 5 acre-feet of water per year in comparison with a cotton farm. And I guess right now I have to say that I really love food and fiber. And so I have nothing against farming. I think there is some farming in Arizona that it's very important to protect, but the water management strategy for the valley, really for Phoenix to Tucson, has been to replace farming with urbanization. And from a water sustainability perspective, that's a very smart strategy. And it's one of the big reasons why we've done so well. We have never had water rationing when we've seen California now since 2015 have water rationing 2 different times. Part of the reason is this strategy of converting farms to urban development. And then another water fundamental, back on track, is that in some areas, including this area, the greater Phoenix area, groundwater is highly regulated according to basically a cap and trade system. A cap and trade system means people who are entitled, in other words, a municipal water provider or a irrigation district or something like that, have an allocation that they're allowed to use, they're allowed to trade their allocation, or they can save it up. And so we have, I'm kind of oversimplifying, but we basically have that for groundwater with many exceptions in the blobs from Prescott, Phoenix, Pinal County, Tucson, and Santa Cruz. And this all is a result of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act that Arizona enacted for its time. It was hailed as quite innovative legislation, nationally regarded as incredibly innovative. I like to point out that California passed its Groundwater Management Act in 2016, and they still haven't implemented the act yet. So we were fortunate, as a desert state that knew we had to do something, we were fortunate to get out ahead. One of the principles of the Groundwater Management Act and the related regulations is to push growth on renewable supplies of water. At the time that Arizona passed the Groundwater Management Act, we had had a lot of urban growth, we still had a lot of farming, and central Arizona was overdrafting 2.5 million acre-feet of water per year. So currently our water budget is about 7 million acre-feet of water. And so just think of it, we were mining, you know, a significant amount of water, of the water we needed from the ground. And people understood for quite a few decades that this was not sustainable. You don't want to grow on a finite supply of water. And so the combination of the Groundwater Management Act and the Central Arizona Project was how we address this serious groundwater overdraft problem. The CAP was commonly referred to as the rescue plan for Central Arizona. It wasn't, hey, let's bring in this big supply of water for growth. It was the rescue plan for Central Arizona. It became a good supply of water for growth because of very good water management, which started with the Groundwater Management Act. In addition, I'm sure you've all heard of the 100-year assured water supply, right? We have, yes, lots of nods, happy to see that. We have a rule that basically any new subdivision of 6 or more homes can't be platted unless the developer first satisfies the Department of Water Resources that development has a 100-year supply of water that is economically, you know, financially, physically, and legally available. So that's a significant part of the Groundwater Management Act, and here is the beautiful Phoenix AMA. This is a screenshot from the Arizona Water Blueprint. So now let's talk a little bit about the West Valley. So the West Valley is one of the things that I think is a huge asset. Here's a map, and I think this comes from the Bureau of Reclamation, it might come from CAP, but one of the big assets that the West Valley has is the Central Arizona Project Canal. That's an amazing piece of infrastructure that provides an opportunity for lots of water solutions for the West Valley into the future. So that's a positive thing. Here's a sort of over-pixelated a diagram from the Bureau of Reclamation study, and I only have it here to show you a few things. And one is that there are 3 different basins, groundwater basins, or maybe sub-basins that we're talking about here. We have the Agua Fria, the Hassayampa, and then the West Salt River Basin. And they're all in different shape. They're not all in the same shape in terms of the aquifer storage. And then we have these little colored blobs on the side show you that those are water providers. And there are a lot of different water providers. In the West Valley and any growth area of Central Arizona, we'll have a combination of municipal, meaning city water providers, and also private water providers like EPCOR and Global and Arizona Water. Now, in the West Valley, some cities have an assured water supply designation, which is really the gold standard for water management, for water providers. Maybe the gold standard anywhere in the United States, certainly the gold standard in the state of Arizona. These are the cities here, you can see, who have their assured water supply designation. And basically what they've done is satisfy the Arizona Department of Water Resources that they have sufficient supplies, physically, legally, and financially available to serve all of their projected development for the next 100 years. So that is really extraordinary. Props to Surprise, I heard you just got your designation, and I noted that you're ahead of a bunch of other, if I can find my note, you're ahead of a bunch of other providers who are going for their redesignation. So Surprise is designated out till 2032. One of the great things about our assured water supply rules is that a designated provider has to keep re-upping. Every 10, 15 years, they have to go back to the department and say, this is how it's going, please redesignate us. We're doing a good job with management, and that's what Surprise is doing. Avondale, Glendale, Peoria, and Phoenix will all have to get their redesignations in 2025, so full employment for Department of Water Resources regulators. El Mirage in 2036, and Goodyear in 2028. So, but this is a very good thing to see. You should be proud of it. Then we have something else, and now I'm going to start to get into where it gets a little complicated. So we have this rule of growing on renewable resources, but developers and some cities in the growth areas have pointed out that they lack the infrastructure to access renewable resources, that, you know, they'd have to build a big pipeline from the CAP perhaps, and maybe they don't have ready access to renewable resources. And so in the early 90s, the legislature created a program called the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. We'll just call it CAGRID. And so, and the idea is that a developer could use groundwater under the development to supply the development, but they must enroll the lands, the subdivision, in this program, CAGRID, which is run by CAP, and then it becomes CAP's responsibility to acquire the water supplies to replenish the water that is being overdrafted by that development. Does that make sense? I mean, be honest and say no if you want me to try to explain it again, but basically the idea is, you know, I'm overdrafting here in my home in one of these developments that are the brown squares, and then it's going to be the job of CAP to go get the supplies to replenish. Now, a couple of things that are a little weird about this, and one is that the replenishment doesn't occur where the pumping takes place. The replenishment occurs close to the CAP because, you know, if they were developing the infrastructure to replenish where the overdrafting took place or the pumping took place, then you might as well be delivering water, right? And so that's one of the things that's a little bit different. And the cost, the bill for the homeowner for replenishment occurs on the property tax statement. So many people aren't aware that that they're in a replenishment district, and that's a little different. And then CAP isn't required to acquire 100 years of replenishment supplies, you know, for each new member subdivision. It has to be ahead about 20 years, but basically it's sort of out there buying the water on the spot market, as it were. So these are things that are a bit of a departure from the assured water supply, the gold standard of water provision. And so I wanted to show you that these, you know, right now these are basically areas that are either about to be developed or already developed where this program is in effect, where CAP is acquiring the supplies and replenishing, but these are areas that have an assured water supply certificate from the Department of Water Resources, where they basically proved to the department that they have that 100-year supply of groundwater, and they've kind of put their markers on that groundwater. They've got dibs on that groundwater. And if these all get developed, they will, almost all of them, maybe not every single one, because I didn't check every single development, but they will all add to that replenishment obligation that will then be the burden of CAP to go and meet. So that's it, the CAGRD. I've already covered a lot of this. I don't think I need to belabor it, except to point out that more than, you know, this is a super convenient program for developers. It makes it really fairly easy for them to meet their assured water supply requirement. Certainly is easier than building a pipeline, you know, and bringing surface water to the development. And so it's a popular program, and more than half of projected development is projected to be enrolled in the GRD. Here's what's happened with the GRD. The light gray, this is from 2005 to 2018. The light gray is GRD development in the Central Arizona, the CAP service territory, and the dark gray is non-GRD development. And you can see that GRD is a little more popular than non-GRD new housing. And that kind of makes sense, you know, as maybe you know, as people who are experts about development and real estate, it's a lot more expensive to build in places like Phoenix, in places that are older. And so that's, if you want to build in the price point areas, in many of these areas, you need to enroll, I mean, the GRD is the program for doing it. Here, so we, the Kyle Center, produced a report about this program. We have some concerns about it, and we have I think the report has something like 225 citations, thank you very much, about the GRD. But one of our concerns is the growing replenishment obligation. That we have a concern that there aren't sufficient brakes on how big this replenishment obligation grows, and it's happening in a context of harder and harder to find water. More and more competition for water supplies, higher and higher prices for the water that becomes available. So you can see that in 2025, this is from the 2015 plan of operation that CAP developed, the replenishment obligation was projected to be almost 67,000 acre feet of water. It didn't get that big. But we'll look at other, this is again from that 2015 plan of operation. You can see that, what's my end date there, 2033, the projections are for, a pretty stiff replenishment obligation of over 80,000 acre feet of water, which is a lot of water. We're always, I guess our eyes are always bigger than our stomach. This is the actual obligation to date as of 2018. And we're really we're not at 66,000 acre feet. We're like at 28, 30,000 acre feet, something like that. So concerns about some of the limitations of the GRD, but in practical terms, we're not in the territory right now of being in a place where it would be super concerning. This is manageable. And I want to say that the GRD is very, very well run by the CAP. They have very thoughtful, smart water planners thinking about these issues and working on them. So it is certainly, we don't have a concern about how well the program is being run by CAP. But we do have concerns about the GRD continuing to be the growth plan for the West Valley and for the East Valley too. In an analysis by Elliot Pollack, who's a kind of well-known economist around town, and Cliff Neal, a well-known water planner, I think this, 2017, they pointed out that really the structure of the GRD makes it the program for development, that increasingly new development will be reliant on the GRD. And in Buckeye, this is a quote from Buckeye's Water Resources Plan. We published our report in 2019, and at the time the mayor of Buckeye was Jackie Meck, who's a very knowledgeable person when it comes to water resources. And he convened a workshop. Not sure if our report had anything to do with it, but it was timed pretty, like on the heels of our report. And he convened a workshop to talk about, where is Buckeye going to get the water for its growth? And at one point he asked the consultant for Buckeye, where is the water going to come from? And the consultant put up this chart showing water supplies that were potentially available in the future. And Mayor Meck said, that's the same water that the GRD is planning to acquire. In fact, the chart came from the GRD plan of operation, And I think it's an important point that a replenishment obligation of 120,000 acre feet of water is really, that is a challenge. And that's the projected replenishment obligation for Buckeye if it grew that big. The ocean desalination plant that's being discussed at full build out would provide 200,000 acre feet of water and cost billions of dollars to build. We're talking about water that's getting more and more costly. In that case, the water it's already projected to cost $2,200 to $2,400 per acre foot, and it'll probably cost more like $3,000 or $3,500 per acre foot in years and years from now when it's built. And the idea that Buckeye would be paying for water at that price to be put in the ground to replenish pumping is jarring. And so our thinking is it wouldn't take too much to make a change to the groundwater replenishment district that could assist cities in getting out from under the groundwater replenishment district. Right now, cities want, when they're reliant on it, and a good example is Queen Creek, the town of Queen Creek, way over to the east, they want to get out from under the GRD. They like the GRD, they're not, but they know that good water management starts with managing the resource yourself. You have more control over your destiny when you're managing the resource as a community. They have been trying to take some steps to get off the GRD, to reduce their replenishment obligation or take control of it. And it's very, very difficult, in part because the CAGRD has all the market power because it's buying the water for all of the replenishment. It's the big customer out there. So it's challenging. And it's hard to sort of put the brakes on development in the GRD and suddenly flip over to direct delivery of water. So this is something that I think we need some creativity and leadership on. We mentioned concerns about supply availability in our report. The current available supply is about 55,000 acre feet. It's way above the current replenishment obligation. But remember, we're looking at bigger, much, much bigger replenishment obligations in the future. And so, the Kyle Center's report raises a concern about whether the current, shorter term timeline for securing the water supplies is sufficient and consistent with these long goals that we've had for having growth on renewable water supplies. So that's the GRD. I'm done with the hard part. Now we'll go to something that is tragically simple, and that is that the Colorado River system is in a crisis. This big supply of water that Arizona has relied on since the mid-'80s is suddenly in peril. We're actually, I think of it as two problems. One is that we're dangerously close to dead pool at this point. And I wouldn't have even used the words dead pool 2 years ago, 3 years ago. That was like, it was verboten for a water person to say that because that would get people upset. And now everybody's saying there's a risk of dead pool. And that's one problem. That problem is solved by having people leave water in the system for 4 or 5 years to get us out of this emergency mode. And it is very, very hard to get people to leave water in the Colorado, to not use water that they've counted on, that they planned on. The other problem is that for so long, Central Arizona has looked at the Colorado River as this big, abundant supply. In fact, we've had extra Colorado River water that we've been storing in the ground. Arizona has stored 13 million acre feet, not only of Colorado River water, also of reclaimed water in the ground in the last 20 years or so. But that we just had all this abundant Colorado River water and now we don't. And so the second problem is Arizona and the 7 states that share Colorado River water and Mexico, we all need to adjust downward the amount of water that we take out of the Colorado River every year. There are many reasons why the system is in such trouble. One is that it was over-allocated. The allocations were based on early 20th century years that were unusually wet. Another problem is that in the lower basin, the water that we take off Lake Mead, the big reservoir by Las Vegas, there was no allocation made for evaporation and water loss. And so the levels would be declining every year in any case. And then we're looking at what may be aridification, A-R-I-D, aridification of the Colorado system. It's certainly hotter and drier. And that means we get normal snowpack and we get 35 or 45% of average snow. So according to the Department of Water Resources, we would need to be getting 160% of snowpack to get close to average flows under current temperature and dryness conditions. That's kind of the way they break it down. Yeah, so it's in trouble. Oh, I don't know why I popped that in there just for some depressing news, but let me go back to the GRD. I'm not done. I just wanted to highlight that the costs for replenishment have been going up, 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 up. This only goes to 2015, but in a 20-year span, the cost went from $52 per acre foot to $644 per acre foot. In 2025, the projections are for replenishment water to cost about $850 per acre foot. There's just not as much water, it's just getting more expensive. So let me say that the CAP has secured a substantial supply of replenishment water for the next, that will meet the replenishment needs even of development for the next 25 or 35 years. In Arizona, we need to do water planning on very long timelines. So I'm not saying tomorrow, next year, in the next 10 years, we'll be in trouble. I'm saying let's address this now while we can, before it becomes a serious problem. And then I'm glad I had that little fun break with the Colorado River. We're back to the GRD. You know, fundamentally, using up groundwater is problematic. If you can have geologic issues like fissures, subsidence when aquifers collapse. As you go deeper, water tends to become lower in quality, more brackish. It has more arsenic and stuff in it, so it requires expensive treatment. And, you know, then you're out of water. You're out of water. And so the developments that are in the GRD do face a challenge ahead of where is the water going to come from in 100 years. I live in Arcadia. My subdivision was built in the mid-50s. You know, we would be coming close to our 100 years. I don't think of my neighborhood as a really old neighborhood, but it is, you know, if I only had 100 years of water, that would be a really old neighborhood. So, you know, finally, once that water is used up, the West Valley is going to need to find replacement supplies, right? You use up all the water, you need to go find other water. So that's the tough news. And then to make it a little tougher, we're getting into this era that I last night coined as Byung, which is bring your own non-groundwater. In Pinal County, the Department of Water Resources did some modeling and said all of the groundwater is spoken for. So we will not issue assured water supply certificates for any new development. If you want to do new development now, a new development in Pinal County, bring your own non-groundwater. Now, just to be sure, there are lots of planned developments with assured water supply certificates in Pinal County. Thousands and thousands and thousands of homes yet to be built. But they are counting on groundwater that they basically got dibs on, and all of the groundwater is spoken for. Very likely, the Department of Water Resources will issue the same ruling for the Hassayampa subbasin, which is part of the West Valley's groundwater supply. Very likely, very soon. And so this, you know, when it happened in Pinal, it was, you know, earth-shattering. It was big news, rippled through the water community. I want you all to be ready for it. This announcement will probably come. I'll be very surprised. I'm willing to bet money. And Pinal has done a good job of getting together and working and planning, explaining. That doesn't mean development stops. There are lots of developments that have their assured water supply certificate. It just means that we have to now start looking beyond the, you know, ahead, look out ahead. And that's really where the West Valley has the opportunity. The West Valley has the opportunity to get out ahead and not have to do all that damage control. So are there options for new water supplies? There are. There are really a lot of good options for communities. And let's start with water management. Our heroes who are running or working in municipal water departments are smart and creative, and they already have a lot of solutions in hand. And one solution that is so visible from this picture is reducing the amount of water we use, and especially reducing the amount of water that we use outside. There is still a lot of capacity in many communities for people to use a lot less water. And when you use less water, That means that your community can use your conserved supplies to satisfy a larger customer base or other demand. Cities like, for bigger, older cities like Phoenix and Tucson, Mesa, to a great extent, conservation is the growth supply. The city of Phoenix projects out about that at build out, that water demand will go up about 13%, and then it will decrease. 13% from now, and then it will decrease a little bit because they expect lots of conservation to occur that enables them to use the water supplies they have in hand. That's not so much the case for new cities where they're trying, new communities where they're working on getting the water supply for growth, for growing demand, but still, conservation is a huge, huge tool. And when paired with reuse, it's super powerful. So currently, cities in central Arizona are reclaiming 93% of the water that goes down the drain or gets flushed and enters the water treatment system. Just think of it, 93%. So if you're a city water planner, water manager, you want to push water conservation outside because water used outside can't be reclaimed. It does serve important values. I wouldn't advocate for not using any water outside, but the more we push conservation outside and reclaim water inside, the more opportunity water providers have to use the same drop of water over and over and over again. So this is extremely powerful. And Arizona really is out on the forefront of this. Other southwestern cities are too, but cities in central Arizona are really leaders in water reclaiming. And so we're well positioned. And there, you know, even far-flung little towns in rural Arizona are, even though they can't get, you know, I guess I should mention the other great thing is we have the Groundwater Management Act, we have our cap and trade system, so cities can put reclaimed water in the ground and get credits. And then know they can trust that that water will be there because they've got the credits. There's an orderly accounting. But even in rural areas of the state where they don't have the cap and trade system, we're seeing this recharge and reclaiming water. So I was so happy yesterday to talk to Michael in the Water Department of Surprise, who told me this was so cool, that Surprise has invested in smart water meters. That's what you see. You see the end user, you know, looking at her water consumption. And Surprise installed these smart water meters which alert the water department, and if the ratepayer chooses, the ratepayer as well, to I guess, anomalies in use. And I think the number was 7,300 continuous use alerts from January to August, where someone had something leaking outside and didn't know it. And that enables the water department to hurry in and work with that ratepayer to address the leak and not have that water be lost. I mean, that's cutting edge technology. It's a kind of investment, you know, that is a very smart investment, and it's extremely powerful for cities because that means Surprise has more control over the water in its system. So all of those water management tools are really powerful, and they will get people pretty far, and they will become a regular part of our lives. We'll probably get to the point where we're doing direct potable reuse in some cities where water is treated to Class A effluent in the wastewater treatment plant, and then it's sent to the drinking water plant and treated up to potable standards. And if that seems worrisome to any of you, let me remind you that about 7% of the water that we drink from the CAP is Las Vegas's effluent. So you're already there, don't worry about it. Actually, Orange County and San Diego are way ahead of the Phoenix area in this. They're already doing it because they need to, and we haven't really needed to do that yet. But it's a very smart water management practice. But there's another huge, huge tool now as of the most recent Arizona legislative session. And maybe you've heard that the legislature passed a bill to invest $1 billion in water supply development. So this was really kind of a moment in time in the Arizona legislature when both parties came together and worked with the governor and worked with stakeholders and the Department of Water Resources to make a big investment in making sure that communities have financing available to do the things they need to do to have a resilient water supply. So there are 3 pots of money. There's one big pot of $1 billion. It does have to be funded over 3 years, so it's only a third funded at this point. But it will go, most of it, 75% of it will go to water importation projects. And it will also, it provides financing for constructing infrastructure and water facilities. That's all by word of the law that is financing. That money has to be repaid, which means the state has created this revolving fund for water supply development. And that is a really big development here. There's also a revolving fund that's loans and grants for, sort of, I think of it as more like small system and rural supplies. And there's a $200 million pot of money for conservation grants, those things like those smart meters, other types of actions or investments that cities could take that would result in water being conserved. So this is huge for Arizona. This is a huge opportunity that cities didn't have a few months ago. And on top of that, we have federal infrastructure. Our federal infrastructure bill also creates a large supply of money that could be available to Arizona water providers to invest in drinking water infrastructure primarily, even though smart meters would probably qualify. So one of the things that is of note is that a great old agency, the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority of Arizona, which has been managing the federal revolving fund dollars that systems in Arizona use, has been put in charge and sort of been reorganized to be in charge of these pots of money. And so right now, as we speak, the board is being put together, and it'll be a few months before the board sort of works with staff, and I think they're going to have another, build up the staff significantly. But this will be ready to go in a few months' time. So there's money. There are smart managers, there are cutting-edge water management techniques and technologies, but where will the water come from? Well, there are many, many ideas for where the water could come from. These are my leading candidates for new water supply for Central Arizona, starting with the astonishing fact that the city of Los Angeles doesn't reuse its effluent. They dump 160,000 acre-feet of Class A effluent into the ocean every year. That's what 640,000 homes worth of water going into the ocean. And so Nevada and Arizona have said to LA, you know what, we could help you. We're really good at this. How about if we make an investment, co-invest with you, and maybe it would result in Arizona taking less shortage. To me, it would feel like we're getting an exchange, but we never exchange water, Colorado River water between the states, but maybe take less shortage in payment, essentially, for the investment. There's a community, so that's option one. I haven't seen any quantification, but it could be a nice amount of water for West Valley cities, for example. There's a Native American homeland right on the main stem of the Colorado River Indian Tribes, CRIT. And this community is seeking federal legislation to authorize it to lease up to 93,000 acre-feet a year. And of course, the lessees of that water would be probably cities, maybe industry in Central Arizona. And remember the CAP? The infrastructure is there to move that water. This lease wouldn't be a great opportunity if we didn't have the Central Arizona Project Canal. SRP, which manages Roosevelt Dam on the Salt River, has a concept that they've been studying that, dams are required to keep an amount of space in case God suddenly makes it, snow like Noah's Ark. And SRP has studied this and determined, you know, seasonally, there are times when it's safe to have a little less of that storage space, because we know we have 2 wet seasons. And if they could just use a little bit of that storage space to hold more water, then they could take that water off and store it in aquifers. And that water could amount to 75,000 acre-feet of water per year. So this is simply, it may require federal legislation, but I think it's mostly just a change in regulations by the Bureau of Reclamation. It's under study. SRP is very, very careful and has been, you know, doing thorough work in exploring this concept. Likewise, SRP is exploring enlarging one of the dams, one of the reservoirs on the Verde River, Bartlett Reservoir. The upstream dam, Horseshoe, has a serious sedimentation problem. And so SRP is looking to kind of stop using Horseshoe for storage, but instead make Bartlett bigger. And if there are 2 different enlargement concepts, by the way, Bartlett is really close. It's a nice place to go for a picnic or a walk. Yeah, nice place, love it. So, but the bigger concept would lead to, if it happens, and of course there are many, many impediments, you know, it's a big, big project, but it could lead to 115,000 acre-feet of additional water. Something I haven't mentioned is that water that was originally allocated to the original Salt River Project lands, or actually Salt River Valley Water Users Association lands, those lands in 1908 that were being farmed and irrigated, much of the water from the SRP system is constrained to those lands. But new water that's developed is not constrained to those lands. So if you knew that factoid about, well, what good does it do? There's already so much water in SRP lands. The fact is that water could be delivered off project, anywhere where the water could go. Same thing with the Roosevelt Dam mod. You've probably all heard about ocean desal. Everybody, you know, thinks we have such giant oceans, why don't we just use that? It's really expensive. But there is an ongoing concept, a binational desal concept that Arizona and Sonora have been exploring. Maybe Nevada would also play a role in it, where water users in the US would pay for a desal plant in Sonora, Mexico, way south of Rocky Point, and then that water would be used by water users in Mexico. They'd get a drought-proof water supply. And Arizona and maybe Nevada users would take an exchange of Colorado River water. How would that water get here? CAP. Again, the infrastructure is there. I can't underscore how important that is for these concepts. Harquahala groundwater, anyone heard of the Harquahala Basin? It's right next to the Phoenix AMA, west of us, and we can probably see it. At some point the legislature realized that rural communities needed their groundwater supplies to be protected, and so they prohibited the transportation of groundwater from basin to basin, but they made an exception for the Harquahala and 2 other basins, and some water providers, especially EPCOR, are now looking at the feasibility of pumping out that water. It would have to be treated, but then it could be put into the CAP canal and delivered to water users in central Arizona, West Valley included. You know, I think I kind of emphasized that groundwater, you know, it's a little dicey if you make that your supply for growth, but with reuse, with other parts of a portfolio, Harquahala groundwater, which is it's a big supply, could be a valuable part of a community's portfolio. And then we hear a lot about brackish groundwater. There are lots of places in the AMAs and out of the AMAs where there's groundwater that's of very low quality. And so it's just sitting there. And that would be another supply that could be pumped up, and it would have to be probably pretty heavily, meaning at high cost, treated and delivered. That's another opportunity for new water supply development. There are many other concepts. We've rounded up the concepts that we think really have legs. And so you can go to our augmentation concept page on the Arizona Water Blueprint and explore the concepts. How did we decide that they have legs? It wasn't just me and my team. The Governor Ducey has a water council. It's called the Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council. And there's a committee of that council which developed a report. It took years and years. I was part of that committee. It was a really in-depth study of the water augmentation options for the whole state. A lot of the options come from that report, and other options come from our talking to water experts and talking to communities and making sure that we have accounted for all of them. So I've already talked about the CAP canal as a really important advantage in terms of having infrastructure in place to move many of these water supplies to where they're needed. And another infrastructure that we have that's really significant is interconnections between SRP and CAP. So they're not fully developed yet, but they're halfway developed. That before a year ago, you couldn't move water you certainly couldn't move water from the SRP system to the CAP system, but the two big water authorities, SRP and CAP, are creating these interconnections so that water can be moved from one system to another. So like that Bartlett Dam water, which would be in the SRP system, theoretically, you wouldn't move it against the stream of the CAP, but you could move it to another place. You can imagine deals where some water user would take an exchange and use that water so the West Valley community could be using CAP water. Deals like that are out there. The interconnections are going to make that more feasible. Here's some other infrastructure that you have in the West Valley, and that is people who've been worrying about these problems and taking a hard look at these problems for a long time. So I think it's now called the West Valley Water Association, but it's an association of cities and water providers and relevant water agencies and stakeholders. Anyone here participate in the West Valley? Yeah, I'm sure you do. So they've been working with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation on a basin study, which is sort of like the really important critical first step. And I don't think the basin study is out yet. I think it's still, it's taking a long time.
Last I heard, it might be available this fall.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, so the basin study is going to be super important because it kind of tells you, okay, here's where we are. Now we know, we know what point A is. Now we can figure out what is point B. But already having these working relationships and the infrastructure of an organization and a board and sponsors is really a very important first step. It puts you out ahead. So that's, brings me to my conclusion, our key takeaways. And that, first of all, thanks to very careful water planning, the West Valley still has a lot of room to grow before it's necessary to go find new water supplies. There's lots of room for growth. It varies from community to community, so there can't, it's impossible to make a blanket statement that's more specific. But development of new water supplies will be needed to provide the water to fulfill all of the aspirational growth. We tend to, let's be honest, we tend to overestimate how much growth will occur, but even if it's not all of the growth that different communities aspire to, it's going to be necessary to get new water supplies. Adapting the CAGRID to enable communities to have a glide path off and do direct delivery or not be locked into replenishment and then a problem in the future of no more groundwater supplies would be a change that could be made in the CAGRD legal structure that we think would enhance the water resilience of West Valley communities significantly. Our legislature and the federal government through the Infrastructure Act have made it possible to finance projects that a year ago we wouldn't have known where the money would come from. That's a very big development. And finally, I think this is maybe the most important thing of all, and that is to get there, it's going to take leadership, coupled with very candid, functional relationships with the water experts in the communities. Sometimes growth is not necessarily happy with, people who want growth aren't necessarily happy with hearing from water planners that it's going to be hard work to get there, but it's critically important that that the leadership be able to trust and have honest, candid conversations with water planners. So that's all I have for you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
How about that for a presentation? So, Bobby, how are we for time? I know it's tight. Do we have time for questions?
About 10
minutes. 5 minutes.
Do we have time? All right, so if you got that.
Best one first.
All right, let me just bring the microphone down, so. Hey, here's one right here.
So, am I on here?
Yes.
Okay, so, on the canals, I walk by the canals, I see the water going up and down. If they take a significant amount more supply, let's say from Mexico or some of the resources you're talking about, what's the capacity now? Can it handle it? In other words, I
Yeah,
don't.
it's a good question, a practical question. Can the canals handle all this extra water? We're really mostly talking about, to a large extent, we're talking about CAP water.
Yeah.
And yes, because we're taking we're taking cuts in CAP deliveries, then there's room. In the SRP system, we really, a lot of the variation you see has to do with deliveries, schedules, but yes, there's capacity, especially when it's coupled with aquifer recharge, where you take water off and maybe you don't have a user right now, but you're going to recharge aquifers with it and use it in the future. So, yep. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on City of Phoenix moving to, if you will, a stage 1 alert and putting a pause on annexation of county land into the City of Phoenix, with the exception of small county pockets that are completely surrounded by the City of Phoenix? And have service in that immediate area, and there's no other water service option.
Well, the city needed to go to a stage 1 alert because it's looking at the real possibility of cuts in Colorado River supplies. So the city of Phoenix has made a $500 million investment in a pipeline. You've probably seen it if you've driven the 51, and that pipeline is designed to move water supplies that are available from the south part of the city to the north part, which is all served by CAP. We really are we've never been in a time like this where we've seen the prospect of high priority CAP supplies cut. I didn't even get into the worst part about the Colorado River. And I'll quickly get into it. In June, the boss of the Colorado River system, the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner, announced that the 7 states that share the water need to figure out a way to save 2 to 4 million more acre feet than we've currently left in the system. So on top of the almost 600,000 acre feet of water that Central Arizona, CAP, is leaving in the system out of a 1.6 million acre feet allocation. On top of that, we have to figure out a way to leave 2 to 4 million acre feet in to avoid Powell or Meade from crashing, from hitting Deadpool. The whole system allocates 15 million acre feet out. So we're talking, 15 to 25% or more of the water we have to figure out right away to leave in. So yeah, this is a very serious, perilous, difficult time. All of the cities went to stage 1 drought, and it was the right move.
Good morning. I'm Liz Recchia, Government Affairs Director for the We Serve Association of Realtors, and we have a water issues task force that's been going on for 5 years because our members are seeing a lot of issues, and one of them is larger concerns, usually from out of state, or foreign countries coming in, drilling down, taking the water and shipping it out or using it on theirs, causing the local water sources for the population, the wells, to go dry. And we're seeing that in Cochise, we're seeing that in Pinal, we're seeing that in some parts of here, Maricopa. So policy-wise, since you're a policy, we have gotten zero recognition from some of the legislators that we've had at our events and said, what can be done policy-wise to prevent that? Because the aquifer is not just one
Yep.
person's. From your point of view now, because we haven't gotten any responses, what are you seeing in policy, or what are you proposing in policy?
Well, let's begin to remind everyone that what you're seeing in these rural areas that you mentioned, Cochise County, Mojave County, La Paz County, really can't happen in the AMAs, in the Phoenix Active Management Area or the other AMAs, because we have a prohibition on new irrigated agriculture. And it's big industrial scale ag operations that are doing that in those rural counties. By the way, one of the big ones, the one that's causing the problems in Cochise, is a Minnesota dairy. So it's not all Saudi Arabia, I always hear that. It is the responsibility of the Arizona State Legislature to regulate and police groundwater. That's the only place it can happen. And, you know, I think there are a couple choices. There's a concept for a sort of AMA light, where communities could kind of have a groundwater management area declared and kind of be the architects of the regulation. That proposal is really worth considering. Maybe if we're in a situation like that where the water tables are declining fast, maybe that should trigger a consumer alert just to protect new homeowners from buying property and then discovering a year or two later that their residential wells have gone dry. So there are lots of different approaches. The legislature, it's their job to fix it. We're all, you know, we all have the opportunity to express to our legislators that it's a problem that needs to be addressed. So, you know, that's kind of our proposal. It's clearly a problem, and you can go to our groundwater level changes app and you can see the basins that are in trouble.
One more question. Maybe two.
Hi, thank you for coming today. I want to just piggyback on that and say, is there a resource where we can see how the aquifer levels are doing throughout the valley? I know some places like New River or Rio Verde have bigger issues, and
Yeah.
that's really the West Valley.
Yeah, start with our groundwater level change app. You can go there. It's basically an interactive map. You can even look at hydrographs of individual monitoring wells. And so that's probably the best place to start. All of the data comes from the Department of Water Resources monitoring wells. So go to the azwaterblueprint.asu.edu.
Just real quick, which number in your phone number is the extra one?
It's either this one or this one. I'm not sure. But thank you.
Again, a nice hand for Sarah. What an amazing presentation. Realizing this presentation was tailored for the West Valley, and Sarah put a lot of effort into those particular slides for this West Valley presentation. So I'm going to give this back to Bobby. Thank you. If you have any questions or want to be part of maybe a growing group from this meeting, my email is on the flyer in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. You're amazing. Really appreciate it.